London Accessibility Meetup number 6, 11th of September 2017, with Laura Carvajal. Session 1. Yes, your site should be accessible. Lessons learned in building ft.com.
Good evening, everyone. First, thanks Al and thanks to Barclays for having me here. It's an honor for me to be here and just telling you a little bit about how it's gone for us at the Financial Times working with accessibility. My name is Laura Carvajal. So yeah, let's get started. I've done this talk a few times, like Al has mentioned, and I like to start by saying that every time I stand here and I look out, I'm reminded of the very first time I went to an accessibility talk. And I remember feeling like, that it was all very cool. It was all very new to me, but I thought this is really something. But does it really apply to what I'm building? I was building a mobile site at the time, and I kept hearing about keyboard accessibility. So I said, maybe it doesn't really apply to me, or maybe if I were starting a new thing, then I would make it accessible. So I felt back then there was this huge gap between the thing that I was building and accessibility. And I'm kind of embarrassed to kind of admit this in public since I'm working on accessibility now. But I like to fully own having been there, because it's helped me appreciate just how easy it is to feel that way, to feel that accessibility is something that's very far away from what you're doing and that doesn't really apply to what you're building, or that it could apply. So. Fast forward to 2016, I started working at the Financial Times. We were building one of the fastest, greatest news sites in the industry, and we had this very old website that we replaced with this new shiny version. We released last October to great success, and we started winning a bunch of awards. We were excelling in performance and security. Basically, every metric that we had set our sites on, we were excelling on. So one day we decided to have a look at accessibility. Maybe we were excelling at this too, just magically. But unlike performance and security, we had never really put a collective effort into accessibility. So to no surprise, we weren't very good. And since this talk is going to be all about the lessons that we've learned, that was the very first thing that we learned, that accessibility doesn't just happen. You have to make it happen. So like I said, my name is Laura. I'm a senior developer at the Financial Times. This is an actual picture of our office. We are a magical place and we own a rainbow. I'm a senior developer. I used to be the lead accessibility developer for the ft.com team. And so what I'm going to tell you today about is a little bit about these lessons that we learned once we realized that we had built this beautiful performant thing that really couldn't be enjoyed by everyone. So that if you happen to be in that place where you're wondering if this really applies to your project, hopefully today you'll walk away convinced that it does, and that it's easy to do, it's easy to get started. So what is accessibility? There are many definitions out there of accessibility. This is one I really like. It's web accessibility means that people with disabilities can use the web. That's it. So I like this one because it really boils it down to making sure that we're not denying access to anyone to the thing that we're building. To go beyond this a little bit, I want to tell you a very quick story. I was in this shopping mall, you might recognize it in Wembley. I was with my daughter, we went shopping, and we were going up those escalators. And as we were going up there, she asked me, so how would someone in a wheelchair do what we're doing? And I said, oh, there's a lift somewhere. And she looked around and said, where is it? And I looked around, and I knew it was there somewhere, but I couldn't see it. Once we got to the top of the escalator, to the second level, I could see it. It was at the opposite end of that big hallway. So she said, well, someone in a wheelchair would have to go all the way there, then up, and then all the way back to do what we just did. That's not fair. And I wanted to sort of explain about regulations, that obviously this is a very new building and it was meeting all the regulations that it had to meet, but she was having none of it. I mean, she saw it for what it was. It just wasn't fair. So, and children tend to see things for what they are in very simple ways. So I like to expand on that previous definition. Well, something happened to the font, but what this says is it's beyond not denying access, we want to ensure that the access that we're providing is fair for everyone. And I'd like to give full credit to my 10-year-old daughter for that quote. So we've covered what accessibility is briefly, but we've also mentioned the word disability. So to look into this a little bit more, we can split disability roughly into 4 categories: physical, visual, hearing, and cognitive. And while we may be familiar with permanent disabilities like being deaf or hard of hearing, we also have temporary and situational disabilities. So the closed captions that benefit a deaf person will also benefit any one of us on that spectrum. And I like to say any one of us because each and every one of us spend time on that spectrum during our daily lives. So because you may have other reasons why you want to watch that breaking news video without audio. So kind of like you know, if you're feeding a baby, you don't want to make any noise. So whatever reason you may have, you benefit from that as well. So I like to say this because just to frame it so that it's not an us versus them thing. So it's not a thing that we need to do to benefit other people. This will benefit everyone. But as far as permanent disabilities go, there are about 1 billion people in the world with disabilities. That's about 15% roughly of the population. And when you factor in where your user base is in the world and other demographics, you will get a clearer picture of what that number is for your business or for your product. So for us, that worked out to be potentially 26% of our users. And something I get asked a lot is like, how's that number that big for the FT? And it's when you factor in things like the age distribution of our users, since our user base tends to skew slightly older or fairly older, so if you find the prevalence of disability in different age brackets, we end up with a number that's actually this big. And I actually had to calculate that number to kind of sell it in the company. So yeah, around 26%. So we all go to great lengths to support all the segments of our user base. Whatever it is you're building, you kind of want to make sure that sort of whoever's using your application gets to actually use it the way you intended. So we sometimes worry about folks using IE8 or IE9 who may be 5% of your user base, but we still try to provide some experience for them. So right now, at least for us at the FT, we had this 26% of users that we were potentially ignoring. So that was kind of a big deal and a big motivator to see these numbers. So let's say you're building something and you're thinking about whether you want to make it accessible. Say now I've convinced you that now you're going to do this and you're going to fix accessibility on your site and you're going to be the very best. And it's scary and it's overwhelming and there's just a lot of information out there. It's kind of hard to know where to even start. So our suggestion is to just start small. For us, starting small meant installing Pali. Pali is an open source tool that can check your HTML, you can check your markup it can detect some accessibility errors. It doesn't detect everything, but it's a good place to start if you don't have anything yet. There are other tools besides Pali, Axcore, and a few others that kind of do the same thing, but this is what we ran into. We found it very easy to use, very easy to install, so we started with this. So what Pali does, it goes through the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is a list of criteria that your website should meet if it's to be accessible. And it checks your markup against each of the items of the guideline, and then it gives you a report of what's broken. So when we ran Pali for the first time, we ran it manually. We said, Pali, run on ft.com. And it gave us back a list of errors that it found on ft.com. Right here on the slide, we only see 2 errors, but there were a lot more the first time we ran it. I think on the homepage, we had over 100 errors. So this is sort of a good way to get a feel for what you have or where you are. And we could have gone about manually fixing all those problems, and then in a few weeks just running Pali again, and then just catching any new errors. But for anything, for a site as big as ours, until we had something that we could automate, this really wasn't very efficient. It was good to get a picture, but we had to have something else. So that's when we moved on to Pali CI, which is basically a wrapper around Pali that you install in your project and that you integrate with your CI process. So let's see, I want to show you just quickly what kind of like a very simplified version of what our architecture looks like. So we have several node applications that live in GitHub. So we have, say, the front page is another application, the article page is another application, sign up, my FT page, they're all individual applications. They all live in GitHub, and every time you create a branch that gets built in CI, in Circle CI, and that's where Pali runs. So I'll show you a little bit later what that looks like. So yeah, and if it's the master branch that you've pushed, then that gets released to Heroku, and that's live in production. Our architects would want to hang me for oversimplifying it this much, but that's kind of what it looks like. So like I said, Pali kicks in the continuous integration phase. So if you have a branch, you put it through CI, and that's where it will tell you, we'll give you a report of what's broken in your branch. To integrate this with the process that we already had, we only needed to add one line to our build script. So it's that line there. It's make Ali. It's just a line that calls Pali CI. It simply just calls it to execute. But Pali CI is highly customizable. So for us, that meant telling Pali CI, well, Pali CI, you're going to run on this URL. And this. So for every branch that we build, it produces a custom URL. So we run Pali CI against each of those custom apps, one per branch. But the interesting bit here is the threshold argument. So I'll show you that. So this is something that didn't exist in Pali before, and they were very open to having us contribute this. We needed this so if we had integrated it without the threshold argument, what this would have done is break every project in the Financial Times. And paralyzed us from releasing any new code, which we really couldn't do. So the threshold, what it tells to Pali is, okay, run your check, tell me what errors I have, but don't break the build. Just give me a green build, but I want to know what errors I have. So that's in Circle CI. That's what this is what it looked like. So it ran all the process in our build step, and at the end it ran Pali on the URLs that you give it for your app. You give it a list of URLs. So my app has these 3 or 10 or 100 URLs. Run on that and tell me what's broken. So it would give us the list of errors, but not break any builds just yet. So that allowed us to sneak in Pali into basically every Node app that we had without ruffling too many feathers. And after we did that, we went about fixing each and every app. So fixing all the errors in each of the apps. So we would have maybe a dozen errors in one app. I think the biggest one had maybe 100 or so, that was the front page. But the smaller apps had maybe 10 or 12 that you could tackle in a day, and then merge that, and then remove the threshold. That's what we wanted to get to. We wanted to get the errors down to 0, remove the threshold, so that we didn't disturb anyone doing their work. But whenever, so after this point, whenever we had a new pull request and that code broke accessibility, then your build would break. So that's after removing the threshold. So we did that for all of our apps, a couple dozen apps. So it was like a race against time. So for the biggest one, we had a couple hundred errors. That took 2 or 3 days. And when we got to the 3rd day, we got, only 3 errors, 2 errors, 1 error, and then someone had merged a pull request somewhere. And it's like, oh, up to 5 again. But eventually we got it down to 0. We removed the threshold and we merged it. So and it would look like this after merging. So it would again tell you the list of errors that you have in your new branch. But in this case, it would break the build. So this would prevent your broken code from reaching production, like any other check that you would have in CI. So once we did this for all of our apps, it was a great feeling. We really felt like winners, because it was really a great moment realizing that no more new auto-detectable errors would make it into production, because you had put this barrier in front of all of them. But we realized that even though people were all for Pali, everyone was aware that we were doing this thing. No one was really actively doing it, just a couple people, myself and another colleague, were just cleaning out all of the apps. They were all very excited about it. They knew what it was. They knew what it did. They were even excited about having their build broken, because it would prevent them from breaking production. That was really good. But at the time, we didn't really do a good job of explaining exactly how the builds would break, and especially what you had to do when you saw the errors and then how to fix them. So that was the second lesson that we learned. Before you set the build on fire, train people. So yeah, it was it was good afterwards, just sort of explaining what you were expected to find and how to fix that. Then it went a little more smoothly. So I want to go over a little bit of what Pali found. So this is something that we had to go over with all developers, sort of what Pali can find and then what you need to do about it. So these are the most common issues that we found, and sort of, patterns perhaps on how we fix them. Well, the very first issue is the contrast issues. That was the most popular one that came up when we initially ran Pali on the site. So one of the examples is our footer. So normally if you have dark gray, so light gray on top of less light gray, it tends to not be very good for contrast. So we were barely on the threshold here, but it failed Pali because it wasn't at, so we're expecting to reach WCAG AA, which expects a 4.5 to 1 ratio on the contrast between text and the background. So we were maybe 0.1 below. What we did was we just tweaked the colors a little bit. Designers were happy because they looked exactly the same, and it just passed all the tests. So we were very close for most of them. There were cases when we were a bit farther away, but designers were happy, to be told that this is happening with the colors that you're choosing. Let's see, what alternatives we can have that still look good the way that you want them to look. So yeah, we fixed all those relatively easily. Another popular issue is had to do with alt text. So in WCAG you will see that any images that you have on the site, you must have an alt text for them. So if you have something like this, that would fail Pali because it fails that item of WCAG. And then doing basically alt and adding some text will fix the problem. But there are some subtleties depending on the type of image. You'll want something or other in that alt. I'm going to go over that very quickly. So we found that we had 3 types of images mostly on the site. We had decorative images, images that convey some information, and then images that convey a lot of complex information. So the decorative images would be something like that. We had, in most of our articles, we have an image at the top, and for an article, adding a description to this image saying Trump waves despondently to crowd or something doesn't really add anything to the content of the article, because the content starts from below, it's the actual text. This is just decoration. So in case of decorative images, the sort of the pattern that we follow is giving the image a null alt, so alt, and giving it an empty string, so that assistive technology can tell, oh, okay, this is an image. It does, pass having an alt, but we're not meant to do anything with it because it's just decoration. There are some there's some assistive tech that even having this will display the image, will sort of read out the image, for example. So we add, at the Financial Times, we add role presentation as well. So we have an empty alt and role presentation. In all the cases that we tested, that basically just ignore the image. All the assistive tech would ignore the image, which is what we wanted because it was just decoration. Okay, so for images that convey information, we had articles like this one here. It says, how Donald Trump won the US presidency in pictures. So the pictures in this case are actually part of the message that you're trying to convey. They're part of the content. So what we did in this case was adding alt text with some actual text that describes what the image is about. Because then if you're going through it with a screen reader, for example, you're reading the actual text that's on the article, and then the article refers to the image as a thing that's part of the content. And then once you get to the image, it will read out this alt text that you've added. So that was really valuable. We don't have too many of these, but we did have a few cases where this happened. And then there's the images that carry a lot of complex information, and we have a fair few of these. This is something that we're currently still working on. So it's, images like charts and graphs that we still have in PNG. So for these, you may see this recommendation to use just long desc and then have that link to an external page with a description. But we don't really use that at the FT because of long desk being deprecated, and we're not really sure about the support, what that's going to be moving forward. So what we do is we give the image, or we aim to, this is not live everywhere, but this is sort of where we aim to get to with all of our images that are kind of like this. We give the image an alt text, sort of giving a summary of what the graph is, and then we have a link below the image, link into an actual description of the graph that you're seeing. So kind of like a long desk that you're linking to an external thing with a description of the image, but in the form of a link. And we were allowed to sort of have an actual link, like an actual visible link there, so everyone benefits from having that link there. So like I mentioned, these are PNGs right now. Something that we're exploring is doing this in SVG, and then we could leverage all the accessibility that you can get into an SVG. This is kind of underway right now, so I'm not really sure which way we'll go, but if you're stuck using PNGs and there's enough information in the image, and there's some information in the image that's part of your content, try to always provide some alternative format in the form of text. You can get a lot wrong with forms, and we did get a lot wrong with forms initially on the first pass, on the first check of accessibility to our site. But I'm going to talk just about two things that were very common in our forms. They had to do with labels and required fields. So for labels, if you're a developer or if you work with markup, you may have used the for and I, so the relationship between the for and the ID, between the label and the input. Although if you're not thinking about accessibility, it can be easy to miss. So we found that in some of our input fields, we had missed this relationship, or we had gotten it wrong. We had copy pasted while we were developing, and we had the wrong for on different inputs. And it's only when you are thinking about accessibility and when you try this out using assistive tech that you realize that it's a pretty big deal. Because if you break it and then you're just looking at the page, there's nothing really to tell you that you've broken it. But now that we were checking this with Pali, and we were actually checking with assistive tech, we found that this was very common, just to miss that relationship. Just making sure that the for and the ID refer to the same thing and relate the label to the proper input, that solved the problem for us. In terms of required fields, we had just placed a star next to the label saying email address star. It's fairly common, but what was really good was adding like an actual required attribute to the input so that assistive tech would read it out as required. And in the end, the star, we moved it into a separate span that actually hid it from assistive technology, because it was reading email address star or name star and then required. So that was sort of the suggestion from the company that tested our site, was just to get that out of the way, but actually have required in the input. That's what's really going to tell assistive tech consistently that field is required. Another thing that gave us some trouble was ads. Well, it gave us trouble not just with accessibility, but in general. But in terms of accessibility, even though they're a third-party thing, it's code that you inject into your site, there's stuff that we can do about it. So for us, what we did is that for every ad that we had on the site, we wrapped it into a class that was ARIA hidden. But then, inside that ARIA hidden div, then you would have that iframe soup that ad providers would inject into your site. But we found that even though this hid it from some assistive tech, you could still fall into, if you're tabbing through the site, you could fall into one of those iframes and just stay trapped in there. So that was a keyboard trap. So what we did to avoid that was after the ad was injected, all those iframes were injected in there. We went through each of them, so we just programmed a little loop that went through all of them and assigned tab index -1 to each one, and that prevented you from sort of falling into the ad with your keyboard. So that helped out a lot. Another thing is having duplicate content. So we like to see it as two kinds of, you could have two kinds of duplicate content on your site. You can have two things that look the same and are the same, and you can have two things that look the same but mean different things. So we're going to address these two separately. So if you have two things that are exactly the same, then keeping only one is kind of the solution that we've used. I'll explain a little bit. So when we have an article on the FT, sometimes we have a section on the right that says that will list sort of related articles to the one that you're reading, and we will have that same list at the bottom of the article, because articles are long, and then the user gets to the bottom, and that's sort of how product and design have decided that that needs to look like. So we need to keep it on the site. But we found that if you're going through this with a screen reader, you had two sections that were identical, and it was just duplicate content or polluting what's already a busy page. And it wasn't really clear why you had two or what was happening there. So ideally, you shouldn't have content that's identical be read out to your screen reader. So what we did, so the recommendation in this case and what we ended up doing was to hide all but one of these from assistive technology. So to do that, I think we hid the one on the right and kept the one at the bottom. So the one on the right would have gotten ARIA hidden true. So it's still there, it's still visible, but we hide it from assistive text so that a user, when they get to the page, they will read out the article, which is what they're here to do. And then we get to the bottom of the page, and then be read out latest on Russian politics. So the articles that are related, which for us made a little bit more sense than having them read out at the beginning. So yeah, that's one solution that we found there. So the other case where you have things on the site that look the same but are different, we had this a lot with the Add to My FT button. So we have a section on the site with a list of topics that you can follow, that you can add to the My FT section of the site. So in this case, we had Europe, Vladimir Putin, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and then an Add to My FT button next to them. But if you are navigating out of context and you say, well, I want to see all the list of buttons that I have on the site, then you get 5 or 7 or a lot more saying Add to My FT, Add to My FT, Add to My FT, with no context of what they actually do. So what we did in this case, and what we tend to do with this kind of case on the site is, so that's the button would be just a button with some text in it. And what we've done is we've added a bit of extra text to the text of the button. So if the button read Add to My FT, it will now read Add Europe to My FT, Add Vladimir Putin to My FT. And the extra bit of text is hidden with a visually hidden class that we just defined in CSS. I've been asked a lot about what class do you use to do this, and I've copied two. I found that we have two versions of this type of class on the FT. So here are the two versions that we use. The first one, visually hidden, that link will take you to kind of our old version of this CSS class that uses clip rect, so basically drawing a polygon of surface 0 and visually hiding your content, but the content's still there. The other one is, I think it's a bit more modern. So, but they're both, you can use either of them, and they're both very good, and they both work for us. I think we're going to try and migrate to the newer one to get rid of the clip rect one. So yeah, we were talking about training your people, before you throw this at them. Another good place to start learning about accessibility we found is this free Udacity course by Alex Boxhall and Rob Dodson from Google. It's free. It's like a multi-week course that you can do at your own pace, and we found it like a really, really good place to start learning about affordances, learning about the basics of accessibility. So yeah, I highly recommend. I'll share these slides later, so you don't have to copy the URL. So yeah, it's really good if you haven't done it. So we've gotten to a point where we have Pale integrated into all of our projects. All of our projects are at 0 errors. All of our builds are green. I like to see that as sort of a first summit that you reached. But there's still a lot more work to do if you really want to say, my site is accessible. Because so far you've squashed all the errors that you can detect automatically. And like we said, that's 20, 30% of those errors. So the rest of them require some human intervention. So we have some examples here of what you can do in terms of just getting the rest of the way there. You can have an external audit by basically a third party who's an expert at accessibility. They can come and look at your site and give you a report of what's still broken, even after you've fixed that initial 20-30%. You can do some customer research, just basically have actual users using our site telling you where it's broken. And then you can learn to use some of this assistive technology yourself. So I'll go over these a little bit, but it's important to say that these aren't mutually exclusive. You could, ideally, we would all be doing all of these, but there's no reason to just, I mean, you can do as many as you can, and as many as you have a budget for. And what I also like to say is that if you have zero budget, if you have no budget for any of these, you can still work on accessibility, doing what we just talked about. So it shouldn't stop you from working on accessibility, but if you happen to have the cash to do some of these, then they're great to do, and I highly recommend them. So let's go over a little bit the external audit that we did on the Financial Times. In our case, that was conducted by the Digital Accessibility Center. They tested our site for a few weeks, and I was lucky enough to be able to go to their sort of testing lab for a day, and I have a video for you. It's a quick 2-minute video of the work that they did.
My name is Rebecca Morgan. I have cerebral palsy. I test with voice activation and keep it only method. Page down. Click button. Choose 3. Move down 2 lines. Click button. The controls for the videos are not being picked up by Dragon. I am now selecting that menu icon, but as you see, focus has now gone to the items in the menu.
My name is James O'Kane. I'm the Colour Contrast and Readability Analyst at the Digital Accessibility Centre, and today on the home page I encountered some text displayed on top of images. Text displayed on top of images can be quite difficult to read because of the varying colour contrast of the image behind the text.
My name is Ziad. I'm a website analyst at the DAC. I test using Zoom text with audible feedback. That's the assisted technology. I'm just going to scroll on down below and just demonstrate this.
Financial and career opinion, markets, companies, world, home.
So there's an empty space here, which would be an ideal place
FT.
to put the subheading.
Rand rally loses steam after mining sector.
Okay, so there's a heading
Shrinks. Rand Mark Canadian HS1 owners explore possible. 22 and ago.
My name is Jonathan Brew. I'm a cognitive analyst at the Digital Accessibility Centre.
There is a moving image that distracts me from all the content. It is the carousel. When navigating through it, I couldn't find the arrow to navigate through each page. And once I found it eventually, finding the other previous button was difficult. Another issue I found on the home page was the layout of the information in this box, as I don't know why the picture overlays the box, which makes no sense to me.
Hello there, my name is Mike Jones. I'm completely blind and I'm a screen reader analyst for the Digital Accessibility Centre. On one of the articles I tested, there are several headings that announcers read more, and these also interrupt the article. In relation to the read more headings, there are multiple read more headings on the page. It's not clear what the user will be reading more about. Further to this, these headings actually interrupt the main article that the user is reading. I found this very challenging because I would read through the first paragraph and then I'd be interrupted by a heading on a completely different topic, and it really wasn't clear where the article picked up again or whether it would pick up again. And to me personally, it wasn't clear whether I had to click on that heading to read more about that particular article. So it would have been helpful to me to ensure that the article read smoothly and continuously without interruptions.
Cool. So yeah, this is only 2 minutes long, but we actually, like I mentioned, got to spend the day there, and for me it was the first time I had a chance to do this, and it's really, if you get a chance to do something like this, I highly recommend it, because it will change your perspective forever on how your users are actually using the thing that you're working every day to build. So yeah, the audit that DAC did on our site produced a very detailed report at the end. It's like 200 pages with all the errors that they had found, even after we had covered this 20–30% of automatically detectable ones. So we spent maybe a couple months going through everything and fixing everything. And then once we had fixed everything in that report, we got official accreditation, and we were really glad to get it. It was months of hard work, but it's really something that you don't want to be the only one holding that type of accreditation. So it's I tend to like to sort of encourage other publications to get on this, because this really is a metric that we should try to be we should be trying to outdo each other on, kind of like performance and everything else. We should try to out accessibility the competition. So another way of checking if your product has problems is having some actual user testing, because you may have all the theory right, you may have your accreditation in place, but you might end up building something that looks good on paper and still get it very, very wrong if you don't have actual users testing it. And lastly, you can learn to use some of this assistive technology yourself. There's a lot that you can get for free, and we had a chance to learn how to use some of these things. The Financial Times, and I highly encourage it if you have some time and you haven't gotten into it. It's really cool. Again, it helps you gain a different perspective. So these are some of the tools that we use. We mostly develop on Mac, so we use VoiceOver that comes for free out of the box on Macs. We also test keyboard only, and we use the Zoom capabilities that we have on the Mac. One thing that particularly helped was going keyboard only, but like really, really keyboard only, because initially we just tested the site, just not using the trackpad for a minute or two. So I personally just turned off the trackpad and gave up the mouse. So I'm going to really go keyboard only for everything. And that was pretty hard, but that's what really made a difference, because that's when you really start to use basically everything, not just the thing that you're building, but other sites with just the keyboard, and it's a lot harder than it looks. But once you do, it's you sort of become this really weird power user that you just use the keyboard, and everything just becomes faster all of a sudden. Initially, this is what my setup looked like. I basically printed out every shortcut of the top 10 apps that I used. But eventually, as you use this, initially you'll get very slow at everything that you do, like your productivity is going to dip for a week or maybe a little bit more. But once you do this long enough, all the paper starts to go away, because you learn all the shortcuts even if you don't want to learn them. I think right now I have maybe that bit left, so that's really good. I've learned all the rest, but every now and then there's a new app that has a new set of shortcuts, and then I need to do that all over again. But anyway, it's really worth it if you have the chance to do it. You'll catch so many things that you weren't aware of in your own product, and you'll catch things in other products and submit, either PRs or tweet them saying, "Hey, this thing is broken on your thing." Things that you wouldn't notice if you weren't using just the keyboard. I get to do that when I have an external keyboard, but when I'm just on my laptop, I still have the trackpad. So what I do is I just make it as uncomfortable as possible. So I remove all the goodies that Apple give me, and I make it very, very slow. So it's really annoying to use. So whenever I go back to using the trackpad, I remember, oh, no way, it's better with the keyboard. So yeah, if you have a chance to do this, just go for it. It will help you build a better product for sure. So that was lesson number 3 that we learned. Throw away your mouse. So going back to this list of things that we need to fix, it's very, because you've learned to use all the tools, you've set up your keyboard, it's very, very tempting to just roll up your sleeves and try to fix everything yourself. But if I have one piece of advice, personally, just try to not go down that route. Wait, sorry, let's go back to Jim Carrey here. One thing that I learned while doing this, and I want to say it's one thing I learned very quickly, but it's something that took me a while, is that trying to fix everything on your own is not really the best answer, especially if you're in a team. My team is maybe 35, 40 developers. If you try to just take it all on your own, you're very likely to burn out. It's really not efficient because they're going to be producing code faster than you can clean it up. And you really are doing a disservice to your team because you're becoming that bottleneck or that person who knows about this accessibility thing. And you will find, if you sort of spread this around your team, you'll find that most of your team, or maybe all of your team, are willing to help. And so if you have sort of a set amount of time that you can dedicate to accessibility, don't spend it all on sort of fixing the problems, but try and find some time to sort of train everyone around you if they're not aware of it yet. Because it's just a lot better, and you get a lot more done when it's the whole team that are working towards this. Another thing that we did was we made it part of our recruitment process. So we added it to, that's kind of an old job description that we had, but we added it on there. And we had an online test that we did, and we had an accessibility question there. And I think we're actively recruiting, so I have to be careful about what I show, so sorry about the redacting. But yeah, if you have a say in any of these things, either recruitment so yeah, recruitment in general, and your online test if you have one, or any coding type test, try and get an accessibility question in there. Try to get accessibility in there. So if you spend the time to train up your team, ideally anyone new that you hire, you want them to at least be aware of these things. So there's less of a ramp up, and you'll know they care enough to, when they're building your product, they'll build it to be accessible. So try and make it even not just a desirable thing, but like a required thing. If you're going to work, you're going to work with us, you at least have to care about accessibility and be willing to learn. So yeah, the lesson that we learned on this area was to not take it all on yourself. So it's the bulk of the work really is taken care of if everyone's doing it. So everyone in your team, from design, development, product, QA, if everyone is aware of accessibility, you've sort of trained them up, given them the tools, it sort of just happens for free, kind of. So it's not something that you need to be slaving over. It's something that everyone is doing. Another good way to spread the word about this, and something that we did at the Financial Times, is making an event out of it. So we had an opportunity back in November last year to put together a roadshow. So we had this big open space in the middle of the office, and different teams set up different things, but we set up this sort of little stand. We invited everyone to complete a form using a screen reader. And if you did it successfully, you entered a draw to win an Amazon gift card. So yeah, everyone loves Amazon, so people stop by. So the deal was that you had to fill out a form that you couldn't see. So we put together a form and we blurred it all out, and people sat there, oh, I'm going to fill out this form. It's like, oh wait, I really need to use the screen reader thing. And for a lot of people who stopped by, they had never heard about a screen reader. Some of them didn't even know what accessibility really was. So this was a great way to get a lot of people exposed to accessibility in one go, in a very short period of time. So the form was really, it had a big menu because I wanted them to be annoyed about having to navigate through a very long menu. If they didn't find the skip to main contact link, which most people didn't find, they just rushed to fill in the form and they had to sort of navigate through all that. And the form was just really asking you your name, your email to tell you that you had won the prize, how many times you had tried to fill in this form. Everyone tried it more than once because they couldn't get to the end. And then if they depending on how you were using, if you were following the instructions properly, you were able to read the second part of the form, and most people was like, get me out of here, I just want to submit and win my thing. So yeah, this is what they had to fill out. It's really not complicated, but it was really interesting to see a bunch of people who had never been in contact with this trying to fill it out with screen reader and wanting to finish. So they would get stuck, they would refresh the page, okay, I'm going to start again. So yeah, it was really cool to see. And something I like to say is like a big takeaway from this experiment so I've been doing this for being software development, I've been doing for about 15 years. But this is like one of the greatest moments, it's moments like this. That's Patrick Hammond. If you know him, he's a seasoned developer. He's rarely surprised by web stuff. And that's him trying to fill out a form using a screen reader. He had never been in touch, so it was like, he kept saying, my mind is blown. So yeah, we got the reaction from him and from the rest of our developers who tried this out for the first time. So this was like an hour that we did this for. We managed to create this space of sort of collective empathy where you got sort of everyone from different disciplines sort of stepping into someone else's shoes, like, oh, this is how someone else uses my site, and not just one person, two people. It's just a lot of people use my site this way, and it's very hard. So it's very different. So having had that opportunity to sort of, because you can explain it to someone. So this is how a screen reader works. This is how someone may use your site. But having them actually go through it just makes a huge difference. So that really changed the team at the FT. People were interested in this from here on. We all still have a lot to learn, but the interest, that sort of planted the interest in the team. So if you have a chance to do this where you work, if you're not doing accessibility yet, just give it a go. We did it for free. We drew some stuff on the wall. It's the Amazon gift card, but there was another event that we did something similar. We brought donuts, and that was very popular as well. So just make it fun and have people come over. Once they're exposed to it, that's it. It'll get done. Fingers crossed. So yeah, that was lesson number 5 for us. Talk about it a lot. Make it your thing. The thing that when you walk in a room, it's like, oh, here's Laura again. She's gonna tell us off for not doing accessibility right. So if you talk about it enough, it'll get through, and try and find different ways of talking about it, whether it's a meetup, whether it's at your office with these kinds of events. So just the more you can talk about it, the better, because you're probably reaching more people than you think. And we had an instance where I was talking about this in the office, and then we had someone walk in the hallway and accidentally listen to what we were talking about, and she happened to be able to get us a budget for what we needed to do. So you'll never know. So keep talking about it. So yeah, we've said you can do external audit, customer research, and learn to use these tools yourself to make sure that your site is accessible. But obviously, these cost a little bit of money. The do-it-yourself part, perhaps not so much. You can get it for free if you're on a Mac. But if you want to get an external audit, you obviously have to pay for that. It doesn't mean that you can't have accessibility if you don't have access to these things. But you may come to a point where you need to raise money. You need to put together a budget for things like this. So it's sort of when we got to this point, I was very naive, and I thought, well, accessibility is the right thing to do. So that just give me some money so I can do this. And it turns out it's not that easy. So that was my 6th lesson. That was the hardest probably of all. It's the right thing to do. It doesn't really get you a budget. You need to sell it. Sometimes, well, at least I had to sell it, and it tends to be the case. If you're not, like a public service, you're not in the public sector, you probably sort of need to do some convincing to, get some budget to work on this. There is so Alice Bartlett. She works with us at the Financial Times. She did a lot of research on this, like on the business case for accessibility. How to put that together, and she found that like the really only evidenced case for it was avoiding litigation, so just not getting sued, and that can be a powerful way to sell it. You have to do this thing because you don't want to get sued. If you're a big enough company, just the risk of that happening is a lot more expensive than putting together a small team to fix accessibility or paying an external auditor to audit your site and things like that. So at the end of these slides, I'm going to share with you with that link and a few others where you have examples of litigation cases and lawsuits where it hasn't gone really well for the company who decided to not be accessible. So yeah, if you need to build a case for your company, then these are good tools to have. And before we finish, I want to take you back to how this all began for us at the Financial Times. So I was on bug duty one week. I'm a developer, so I had 1 week where I had to just fix bugs. And I went on Jira and I found this card where we keep all the bugs that we've triaged and said, integrate Pali. So well, I don't know what this is, but I'll have a look. And I went into the history of the card, and I saw that it had been bouncing around our board for a while until one of my colleagues, Ben Fletcher, prioritized it. He was a senior developer at the time who just happens to be deafblind, and he went through that card and said, hey, maybe this is something that we should be looking into. I don't know, have a go at it during bug duty. And that's sort of how it got to my hands. So that was a really important lesson. And the last that I'll share with you tonight is that just Ben's small action really snowballed into us building a better product, into my team learning about accessibility and caring about it, and it really led to me standing in front of you all here today. So diversity really improves your product, it will improve your team, and it will improve your life. So in my case, it just basically changed my life and got me to where I am now. So just to summarize and to give you some actionable things, so probably we're an accessibility audience, there's a good chance that a lot of people here are working on this already or already familiar with all this. But if you happen to be in a project where you're just starting out and you need some things that are that you can do in under half an hour tonight. Well, the first thing is accessibility doesn't just happen on its own. You need to do something about it to make it happen. Integrating Pali CI in your build, whatever you're using, it's very quick. You can do it in under 30 seconds and just give it a very high threshold. Doesn't matter if you have errors. It will just tell you what you have. It won't break anything. You have it there. Train your team. A good place to start is sharing that Udacity course. Obviously, it takes a little while to go through it, but one good thing that you can do is share it with your team, throw it over your mouse. I highly, highly recommend it, but print out some shortcuts before you do that. Otherwise, you can feel kind of stuck. Don't take it alone. If you feel like you're the only person caring about this thing in your team, try to spend some time, not just fixing things and being the cleanup crew, but just trying to get everyone else involved. Talk about it on Twitter, put together a roadshow or something similar where you get the word out. If you need to raise a budget, the avoiding litigation bit tends to get things moving, so I'll share some links with you. And diversity, I wish I had like a silver bullet or something you can do in under 30 seconds tonight to fix diversity in your workplace if it needs fixing. But fortunately, there's no silver bullet, or I don't have one. But if you have a say in it where you work, try and prioritize that. And if not, just make it another thing that you talk about, because it really makes a difference having a diverse team sort of on how you build your products. So a while back, having this sort of like a long flight of stairs be the only entrance to a public building could have been the norm. Nowadays, it would be unthinkable to have that be the only entrance to a building. So my advice to anyone sort of building something where they haven't considered accessibility is to I just like to say, don't wait until it becomes this unthinkable to build inaccessible websites, because the time to make your site accessible is really now. So just go for it, just do it. And that's me. Thank you very much.
So we'll squeeze in a couple of quick questions. Put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. One there and one there. Go there, you're
Thank you. Hello, thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. You mentioned briefly PNG versus SVG and SVG being more accessible. Could you just talk about making an SVG accessible and to what extent it's better than other image formats?
All right, so I don't really know much about the details of making it accessible because I'm unfortunately stuck working with PNGs, but I guess the basic issue here is if you have a PNG, you have this blob of image that there's no like readable information that you can get out of it, whereas an SVG is just code. And there are a lot of patterns for just adding accessibility attributes to your SVG so that it can be actually interpreted by assisted tech. I haven't had the chance to work with SVG. There are a lot of experts out there that I could point you to. I'd be glad to. But yeah, you can do a lot more with SVG than you can do with PNG.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Check out a great article from Leonie Watson on SVG accessibility.
Leonie Watson published an article recently. I retweeted it about 3 hours ago, so if you follow me on Twitter, you'll find it.
Hi Laura, great talk. Just quick question, did you get any better feedback from customers on the FT site then, once you made all these improvements?
That's a good question, and that's something that we want to do, because when we got started, so when accessibility was completely broken on the site, we sent out a survey to our users, and we had a couple hundred responses where they just said it's terrible. So we got rated like from very, very bad to kind of terrible. So yeah, way below average. So what we want to do now that we've fixed it is just send out the same survey to ideally the same people just to see how that has improved. But we don't have that data yet, but we want to get it. Yeah, because it'd be very useful just to see. Hopefully, we're not as terrible anymore. Yeah.
One last question at the front.
Slightly cheeky question. Did you have any reaction from the advertisers for you decreasing the number of impressions they were getting by hiding it from screen readers, etc.?
I wouldn't say we decrease the number. So if you had sort of screen readers would be trapped in there. They were just trying to get out because the ad itself is not accessible, so it's not telling you Repsol, buy our gasoline from us or anything, because the ad is not accessible. So there was no way that a screen reader user would want to actually click on it. If they were clicked on it, it was by accident. But what we found that people were trying to do was jump out of it. So no, that didn't cause us any trouble.
I was just hoping they'd either change their adverts or something like that. Exactly. I was wondering if it had a kind of a reverse effect.
Yeah, that would be really cool. That's something, in our dreams, in our backlog that, that would need a lot of, sort of time to do, is speak to our sort of ad provider saying, you have this untapped 26% of our users or whatever percentage it is. If you made your ad accessible, then you could get some extra clicks because people would know what the thing that you're selling is. But yeah, we haven't gotten there yet. It's a good question, though. Thank you.
Love your presentation. I think you've just come up with a better business case.
Okay.
That's the only thing I don't like about your presentation. I think most people look at litigation and think, okay, we're the insurance people, are we? Anyone want to work in the insurance industry? Anyone in here? Not really. If we get this right, loads of people smile. Loads of people buy more stuff. Alice is wrong, fundamentally wrong. I have the figures to prove that she's wrong. The best business case is that this is good business, not that you're going to be sued. Because put your hand up if your company's been sued for accessibility in the UK, which has had laws for longer than most countries in the world on accessibility. Thought so. It doesn't work anymore. Make it fun, make it interesting, make it good business. It is.
I know you don't like this bit of my talk, and I keep having it in because at least in our experience, it was only until we talked about this is a real risk that you have. It's like our product team said, okay, here's some money. So maybe we had just bad luck there. Maybe there'll be companies that you just let them know that this is the thing that you need to do because it'll just improve the experience for so many people, and you will sell more of the thing that you're selling if people can click through your form. So we tried all those things. In our case, it's like, yeah, that's nice, but so it was the litigation bit that just pushed them over the edge. Hopefully, where you work, your people will be pushed over that edge before litigation. But if all else fails, you have that. It's a real economic risk. So yeah, but thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you all put your hands together and say this?
You